A depth map is a grayscale image in which each pixel shows you how far away that pixel is from the camera. You can use a depth map to attach it as a mask on any type of effect. Typical example, a fake depth of field where the background is more blurry than the foreground, or color grading effects where something gets darker into the background, or for example a fog effect. You can use it on clips, you can use it to animate still images. In this tutorial I want to show you a range of examples. I show you how I create the depth map, how I can tune the depth map. I will start with the depth map tool from DaVinci Resolve, which can work in many cases. Sometimes you need to refine it or adjust it. And I will give you a free macro as well that can help you with those adjustments and help you make them more performant. I will show you some cases where I do adjustments manually or where I build a depth map from scratch with a gradient and perhaps the magic mask. So different ways of creating depth map, different ways of applying it. Let's have a look at all of this. The AI tools that I'm using here, or DaVinci Resolve Neural Engine tools as Blackmagic Design calls them, so the depth map, the magic mask, those tools are only available in the studio version. I know a lot of people use the free version of DaVinci Resolve. There are a few things here that you can do with the free version. However, keep this in mind if you want similar tools. There are cloud-based services and so on that can create depth map and that can do some automatic rotoscoping and so on. In most cases, you end up with a subscription-based model if you want to get this from other places. So with DaVinci Resolve, I purchased my own studio license with Fusion Studio version 7 or 8. So this is my license dongle. The label is falling off, but it's still working for DaVinci Resolve 18 now. So it certainly has paid off for me, and I think if you use it on a professional level, it's pretty much a no-brainer. This tutorial is an intermediate level, it's not an introduction to Fusion, so if you're new to Fusion, check out the free course on my website, and then let's dive in. Let me directly start with this little drone shot here, and from the Shift spacebar menu I bring in the depth map, and you see it's now here 2 times. One of them is a Resolve FX, the other one is the Fusion native depth map. Both work exactly the same, except that the Resolve one, with the picture, that's the Resolve one, that this one has here advanced options to handle output blanking. So if you have footage with blanking, like the bars top bottom, then you can choose here what to do with those. Personally, I rarely have those in Fusion. Usually it's something that's being applied afterwards, not something that comes into Fusion. So I usually don't really need this. So otherwise the depth map that is Fusion internal, which is this one here with the acronym afterwards and the Fusion symbol, is otherwise doing the exact same thing. And this one is also available in Fusion Studio. Let me show you right away. And you see a grayscale image. There is here this preview active, which means that the depth map is in RGB channels. Usually I don't want this. I think this is more like a color page thing that people might want to preview it in easily and then turn off the preview later to use it. If you turn it off, you see the RGB channels, and then in the alpha channel you see the depth map. That's also a little bit strange because RGB with depth map alpha is a bit strange, but if you only use the alpha channel, then it's completely fine, and that's probably how I would use it by default. Let's say we want to use it to make a kind of fake depth of field in a simple version, then I can bring in a blur, or if you want it slightly better, perhaps a lens blur. It's a Resolve FX effect. There's also a defocus for Fusion. I tend to use the lens blur, it's pretty good in Resolve. Lens blur, bring this one in, and then I use this as the blue alpha channel, so attached to the blue alpha mask. And because this has already an alpha channel, if I bring in the lens blur, the alpha channel is automatically being used, and we are blurring more in the front than in the back because our depth map looks like this. So black here means no effect here, and brighter here, maximum effect here. Obviously we have to invert it if we want a blur effect. So now everything gets pretty blurry because, well, we have like pretty strong gray to white values here. And this is where you can adjust the map levels, and you can use here the near and far limit. And always have to think about after I invert which one is which. But the near limit is still the front. So if I bring this down, I can limit from where the blur starts, and then far limit depending on where the maximum should occur. And then gamma is a gamma correction on this grayscale image. So this is basically color correcting a grayscale image, or tonal adjustment to a grayscale image. And the gamma correction can help you to make that transition slightly different between near and far. So it will make things either brighter or darker overall, but especially like in the mid-range, you can decide better if this should start a bit slower and then transition towards the end, or if you want a more immediate transition. So that's what you can do with this. And this is pretty much all you need to do if you want like a distance-based effect that gets stronger, like I have here with this type of effect. Personally, I hardly ever do it the way I've just shown you, even though that's how the tool is intended. What I do is I have created myself a macro which I can run afterwards, because all of these effects are post-processing effects that work on a grayscale image after it's been computed. The problem here is this depth map can be really slow. I have an RTX 3090 card at the moment, and if I compute this and play it back, now I'm also running the screen recording, but you see I'm getting like 1.3 frames per second. Maybe I get 2 frames per second, something like this on an Ultra HD image. That's pretty slow. What I like to do is I like to cache the entire thing, but then afterwards have flexibility over the post-processing. And that's why I created a small macro that I'm happy to share with you, where I can do this stuff afterwards. So let me bring in my macro. It's called depth map adjustment. That's what I created. If you want to see how it works, feel free to open it up and look inside, and you can explore how I created this thing. And it has pretty much all the sliders that I have here in the original tool. Looks slightly different, but I have the adjustment. I have the near and far limit as a range control, so because I don't want near before far. So that's why I made this like a range control rather than 2 sliders that you have in the original one here with the near and far limit. And same for the map adjustment, same for isolation. I can show you later if you want to isolate depth. And then post-processing, I have everything except one slider, this post filter here. This is supposed to make the map a bit smoother or fix some edges based on an edge detection on the image, I believe. I have no idea how this is actually implemented, and I also haven't so far had a lot of success in actually using that slider. So, well, for now, I don't have it in my macro. If someone can tell me how to implement this, I'm happy to include it. So far, I just don't know what to do with it. That's why I don't have it. And then I added an additional section here, output, where I can bring my alpha channel automatically into a Z channel, which is useful for fusion tools. But before I do that, let me quickly show you why I do this. I don't want to recompute this all the time, so I do a right click here and cache this to disk. Or even if I cache it to memory, just let it play through once. I want to make sure that if afterwards I make these adjustments, that my RAM cache doesn't get invalid immediately, which happens if you work on the same tool. So I will cache it to disk, enable cache. I will also lock the cache, which means it's not getting automatically recomputed if I make something stupid in between. But I also have it immediately after the media in, so there's very little chance that I accidentally do something that would invalidate the cache. That's why I feel comfortable locking it. Otherwise, you should probably not lock your cache. Then you can click pre-render and grab a coffee while your depth map is being computed for all frames inside the render range. Okay, I finished my coffee and Fusion finished the render cache. Most of it fits into my disk cache, so if I play from disk cache, I have now really fast access. I don't need to look at this. I look at the depth map adjustment, and I think already the sliders, if I adjust the levels here, for example, are a bit more responsive, and I should have cleared this before I rendered it. Never mind, I'm happy with this, but generally I would start with the default values so I have full flexibility afterwards, and then make the adjustments here however I want to adjust here. Let's quickly discuss the isolation just to cover the tools. So if I use the isolation, then I will probably not use the map adjustment. I will probably bring the softness down and the tolerance quite down, and then use the target depth to decide what I want to isolate. And you see here, I'm kind of isolating like bands of depth in the image. You kind of isolate that target depth, and then I would bring the softness up again, up to taste, depending on how far I want to bring it. You could potentially use this if you invert afterwards. You could use this like for this kind of tilt-shift macro effect. Then you can, maybe use this as a map for a tilt-shift blur, something like this. Maybe not the ideal picture for this, but that's one way how you could use it. You could try to use it for rotoscoping, though in my experience the quality is often, it's just not precise enough. And in many cases where I could use the isolation, I end up using the magic mask instead, because I can just, if I want to select one object, I just select that one object. But if you want to select an entire range, then this could be useful. Let me show you what I meant about the Z channel here in Fusion. So let's use that now. I will map to Z channel and clear the alpha. And in this case, let me not use the lens blur here, but work up here. I have the original image now with a like full solid alpha channel, and I have a Z channel here. If you want to view the Z channel, you should normalize the color range, which will normalize your viewer from black to white, because the Z values, as you can see down here, are negative, and they usually go negative from the camera to far into the distance, and then it depends. I think I previously inverted here. So here in the preview I inverted, that's why it goes in the other way right now, but we can always invert back to start from 0 and go into negative distance. And what I can do with this now is use tools that use the Z channel in Fusion. For example, the fork tool uses it by default. And in this case, I can sample near and sample far and bring it into the viewer, and you see the fork, and I have fork opacity, and then again I can use the adjustments in addition if I want to adjust this further. So just a quick idea, there is the fork tool, there is the depth blur. So those tools use directly the Z channel instead of using a mask. So if I wanted to do a fork manually, I would just merge a background and then mask the background based on the depth information, and the result is the same. We have, I think, reasonably successfully applied the depth blur on this landscape image. And if I look at the channel again, so I do get the furthest distance back here behind the mountains, that makes sense. I'm closest here, that makes sense. I get the shape of this hill, kind of, that makes sense. I get the lake, like almost with the edge here. I can pretty much recognize it in the depth channel. So for some effect that is not super detailed, but some overall like blur or slight color correction on a landscape or so, for this I feel it's really accurate enough. There are some cases where it's certainly not accurate enough. First, I thought this clip here might be a great example, because these trees, they have really good contrast, so I was kind of hoping that the depth map would get them, and it does, as you can see here, somehow. But it's also extremely rough. There are lots of edges missing, and it's flickering and so on. So the result is really not that good. For a very, very gentle effect, some very gentle blur or something, maybe, but for any stronger, significant effect, it is not working. Here I have an example where the depth map is giving me a somewhat reasonable job. It is flickering a little bit. It's certainly not perfect. The skyscrapers in the background, in some places they're a bit rough, but that's probably okay if I don't want to do a very extreme effect. But what is probably not so okay is that I have here some issues with the edge in the foreground, especially here on this this left skyscraper here, but also on the right one, and let me normalize the viewer again to see it a bit better. You see, yeah, we are getting like some kind of gradient which is a bit unclean, and then the edge is also not very clean. So in a case like this where it's like mostly working, but maybe I have some foreground object where it's not working so well, I might choose to manually update the mask. And the way I do it here is I will use polygons, put them over a gradient, and then use that to fix my alpha channel. So let's set this quickly up. So let me first bring in a polygon, and I'll just do the left one here, this left building, which is not too difficult, so I can do it quickly. I'll just mask this off like this, and I just need to get the edge right. The rest doesn't really matter all that much. And I will not even try to track this. It's probably faster if I do it manually. So I select all the points and then go to the last frame where I see the edge, Alt and shift it to the side. And then I'll do a few frames in the middle, and just while everything's selected, Alt, left click, few minor adjustments. And then I have a polygon which is tracing this edge. Now I'll use a background node and set up a gradient, probably here on the first frame. Set up a gradient, and I will just move the endpoint here, move it like to the maximum that I need, and now sample some colors. So I can use the background here to sample colors. So I think the grayscale value here at the edge of the skyscraper is probably okay. So for my white point here, I am sampling like this gray, and then for the front, I think it should be more like this. It should be probably a bit brighter. So I will sample another gray value, maybe here. And because, I didn't pay attention, because I'm on the RGB value, I'm using here gray and alpha values. So I'm sampling everything, but the alpha value is what I'm using. So don't get confused if this gradient gets a bit colorful right now. Doesn't matter, we only need the alpha channel from it after masking this off. So this is the part that I actually need. I probably don't want the mask super sharp, so I will just give a tiny bit of soft edge. Let me look at the alpha channel. Yeah, so this is kind of what I want to have inside this image. So I will combine the two alpha channels. I might bring in a bitmap tool, which just throws away all the channel and only uses the alpha channel, so I can avoid any confusion. Let me put this on this background. So from here on, I just have alpha channel. I don't use these accidentally sampled background colors. And then I can do this one more time. Let me bring in another one here. So here I want to use the alpha channel as well. And if you combine these, you can actually attach one to the other, and then you get here this paint mode. It's the same as when you're attaching polygons. So it's one way of merging alpha channels together. And this is the combined result. And you see I have cleaned up this edge here. I should probably do the same here on the other side and clean up this as well, but you get the idea. I can just add a second polygon, second background node, repeat the same process again, and can clean this up. Using gradients manually to create depth information is often a good idea. Let me show you a little bit more trickery around that concept for another landscape shot. Here for this shot, the depth map is actually working reasonably well, I guess, but it's also not really doing much because it doesn't have to do much. I mean, we just go into the distance. I kind of assumed that the sunlight reflections here would confuse the depth map, but it didn't. However, if I play back just over a few frames, you see that it's kind of flickering a bit. So that part is not so great. And of course, the horizon line is not very sharp. Do we need that? Well, it's probably just depending on the effect, but probably it's just so far in the distance that it doesn't matter. And you just need that gradient behavior. So in this case, the depth map is really not giving me any advantage. It takes too long to compute, and it has some minor issues and so on. So what I would do in this case instead is just bring in a background, use a gradient, and you probably know what I'm doing. I'll just set this, let's set this to the middle, 0.5, 0.5, start and end, and then set this from 0 to where the horizon is. And then let's have a look in the color channel here. So we can go from black to white or vice versa. And then sometimes you want to adjust better how you transition from black to white and want to change how this progresses into the distance. Sometimes I might just sample one just by clicking and then push this out a little bit, and you see how you're easily adjusting the gradient. You can do the same from the other side, or move this around just a value between black and white and then just push it a bit, to have it a bit further or a bit nearer. If you want, you can do this multiple times. You could also add a curves tool and afterwards and work on the luminance, but this is pretty simple if you have a gradient anyways. Another thing, this image actually moves a little bit, the camera shakes a little bit. Let's say we really wanted that horizon precisely, then I could also track this, so I can do a right click, modify with tracker position, and I just add the media into the tracker source and position this tracking point, let's say over these bushes here, and track this. And now you see here my tracker is jumping around based on the camera shake. However, I probably don't want it to go left and right, but just up and down, so that the gradient doesn't, get tilted. So we have the tracking information here, which is on this tree. So on this tracking information, I do a right click, insert, and I insert another modifier, in this case an expression. This just means that the first modifier, the tracker, is driving one point in the expression, and then I can output that point or can manipulate that point that is coming from the tracker before it's going into my background node, into my gradient. This point 1 here is the tracker, and in the expression modifier you can do P1x and P1y, which is the x and y coordinate of that point, and that would just give the same, send the same out of the expression that's coming in. Or you can now fix the x coordinate to 0.5, and now I have fixed the x and kept the tracker on the y, so I've created myself a tracker that only tracks the y movement but not the x movement. So tiny little advanced tracking tip in between, just because it made sense on this particular shot. These were some ideas about how you can work with gradients. Let's work on one example where we combine a gradient with a magic mask instead of a depth map. If I look at the depth map here, you see I have some problems. So her arm in some cases isn't recognized at all. And also the depth map overall, you see it gets blurry and foggy in some places. I do kind of like that it recognizes the stones here, although that's probably not even necessary, because it's not like we are jumping 10 meters down here, so that might even be exaggerated in the depth map. But what is certainly the main problem is not whether or not we are getting this here, but whether or not we are getting her. And for people, usually the quality of the depth map is simply not good enough. But we do have something that works better on people, and that's the magic mask. This is how I would set this up here. I will start with a background, and for the background I'll just create again a gradient like this up to the horizon, and now I add her to the foreground, and for this I'll bring in the magic mask. And then sample in a few places. We don't have the person mask in Fusion, but only the object mask so far, which just means you have to sample with a few more strokes. And then track this. And we can tune the magic mask more. I did a separate video on magic mask in Fusion, so I will not go into the tuning here, more into how I apply this. And I will use the magic mask to mask another background and merge this over my previous background. And this is basically my new depth map. I can, depending if she was not in the front, I think in the front black is probably right. If she was further in the back, I would just sample like where she's standing in the back and move her further to the back or further to the front, however she's in the image. But here in this case, probably keeping her completely black is correct. And I have not worked with the alpha channel in this case. You can set up the gradient in the alpha channel like I did before. Or if you did what I just did and just worked in the color channel, then add a bitmap tool again, bitmap, and I can set this one to any color channel, like to the red channel or to the luminance. And then from here onwards, I have again an alpha channel, which I can use for an alpha mask. Let's bring in a lens blur. And here we have a depth of field effect, which keeps her in focus but blurs the background. There are some issues with depth of field effects like this, especially if you have hard boundaries. You will see some artifacts here, and I'll cover that in a separate video, what you can do. You can do it better than what I've done here, but the basic setup of your depth channel can look like this. Last example I want to show you is using the depth map on a still photo. That works often quite well, sometimes even better than on video clips, because you don't have problems from one frame to the next with inconsistencies. However, one thing that the depth map doesn't realize is that it's actually working on a still photograph, which can be a little bit annoying. But if you look at this setup here, so here I just used this merge over background to scale down the photo, so I'm not working on some 6K or whatever this photograph is. So I just brought it down onto an HD frame for the tutorial. And here I have my depth map attached. And there's no animation, nothing going on. It's just a photograph. And if I play back, you see that it's being computed like on every single frame at my awesome 2.4 frames per second speed. So that doesn't make sense. So what I will do in this case is just take a still frame from the depth map. So I will add a time speed or time stretcher, doesn't matter. Let's take the time stretcher tool, and the source time, I will reset this and keep it fixed on frame 0. And that's how the time stretcher works. So it will play back frame 0 from now on. And now you see it immediately, my render cache is immediately showing the entire duration because, well, there's nothing to be rendered. It's just a still now from frame 0 that I'm grabbing here. So now I can work on this, and if I want, I can further adjust my depth map afterwards. If I want to animate it, for example, that's again a place where my macro comes in handy. So my macro, or if you want to use it like brightness contrast adjustment or curves tool or something like this, you can do it manually. I'll use my macro because I have it. I use this, attach it to the alpha channel here. And let me see that I actually have it in the alpha channel. Let me disable the preview. Okay, so now I have the alpha channel here and my depth map adjustment afterwards, and then my color corrector. And this color corrector here is transforming the scene into like a night scene. And now I want to have a sunrise starting from the end of the tunnel. I know, cliche, but let's do that anyways. So I attach this here. Let's start with one of the limits. Yeah, let's bring this down. So this is night, and I animate this over the duration, bring it up, and then I think I'll bring it up all the way, and then starting from the middle, let me put a keyframe in the middle, and then I'll bring this one up just from the middle so that we have a more gentle approach. So we have this, and then we go into full daylight towards the end. Here we go with a fun little effect for the end. Thanks for watching. If you have any other tricks around the depth map, any other ideas how to use it or how to tune it, let me know in the comments. Also, I will be following up with another tutorial specifically on depth of field, because this is so much more than attaching a depth map to a blur tool. There are ways to get it done in a much better way. So I will cover this detailed in another place. Stay tuned for this. And again, thanks for watching. Take care. Cheers.